Power doesn't always fall because of a stronger enemy. Sometimes it falls because of one ordinary person who refuses to stop being kind. I used to believe fear was the strongest currency in New York. Fear kept men loyal. Fear protected borders. Fear made rivals think twice before saying my name. For 15 years, that belief built everything I owned. Then one rainy Tuesday morning, a small neighborhood bakery proved me wrong. My name is Vincent Moretti, and people have called me many things. Businessman, criminal, king, monster. None of those names mattered the moment I pushed open the weathered glass door of Carter's Bakery on West 83rd Street. The little brass bell chimed above me, bright and cheerful, completely unaware of who had just walked inside. Warm air wrapped around my shoulders, carrying the scent of fresh sourdough, cinnamon rolls, melted butter, and dark roast coffee. It was the first place I'd entered all week that didn't smell like polished marble, expensive cologne, or boardroom tension. My security team waited outside as always. They knew better than to follow me unless I called. This was one of the few places where I insisted on walking in alone. I wasn't there because the bread was famous, although it deserved to be. I was there because, for exactly 15 minutes every Tuesday morning, I could pretend I was just another man buying breakfast before work. Behind the counter stood a young woman tying a white apron around her waist. Light flour dusted her sleeves, and a loose strand of chestnut hair escaped her ponytail every few seconds no matter how often she tucked it back. She couldn't have been older than 28. Her name tag read Emily. She looked up, smiled without hesitation, and said, "Good morning. Give me just a second." The croissants came out a little earlier than expected. There was no recognition in her eyes. No nervous pause. No whispered conversation. She had absolutely no idea who I was. I found myself answering with a smile I hadn't used in years. "Take your time." She disappeared into the kitchen, and I listened to trays sliding across metal racks, timers chiming softly, and someone humming an old country song beneath their breath. The sound felt strangely comforting. My phone vibrated. Anthony, my head of security. I ignored it. 30 seconds later it rang again. I silenced it without reading the message. Whatever emergency waited outside those walls could survive another minute. Emily returned carrying a tray of golden croissants, their flaky tops catching the morning light pouring through the front windows. She placed them carefully behind the display case before looking back at me. "First time here?" she asked. I almost laughed. I'd been coming every Tuesday for nearly 3 months, always wearing a baseball cap and a plain jacket instead of tailored suits. "Do I really look that lost?" I asked. She grinned. "Only people who are here for the first time stare at the bread before ordering." I glanced toward the shelves lined with fresh loaves. Maybe I was trying to make an important decision. "Life's full of important decisions," she replied. "Bread shouldn't be one of them." I couldn't remember the last time someone had spoken to me without measuring every word. She treated me like everyone else who walked through that door. No fear. No expectations. Just another customer on a rainy morning. Outside, tires hissed across wet pavement as traffic crawled through the neighborhood. The rain tapped gently against the windows while people hurried beneath umbrellas, chasing ordinary lives I had almost forgotten existed. Emily slid a paper bag across the counter. "Try the honey oat loaf," she said. "It's my favorite recipe." I reached for my wallet, but before I could pull out a bill, the bell above the door rang again. 3 strangers stepped inside, bringing the cold rain with them. None of them looked at the bread. Every instinct I'd spent decades sharpening whispered the same warning. They weren't there for breakfast. And for the first time in years, I realized fate had just walked through the same door as I had. The tallest man removed his soaked jacket without saying a word. The second locked the front door and flipped the sign from open to closed. The third simply watched Emily. Not me. Her smile faded, replaced by the confused expression of someone trying to understand why a perfectly ordinary morning had suddenly stopped feeling ordinary. She looked at the 3 strangers, then at me, completely unaware that every instinct inside me had already begun calculating exits, distances, and possibilities. Anthony had called twice. Now I knew why. My phone buzzed again, but I did not reach for it. One of the men spoke politely enough to fool anyone passing by the window. "We apologize for interrupting breakfast." His voice carried no anger, only confidence. That was far more dangerous. Emily brushed a bit of flour from her apron and offered the same kindness she had shown me. "I am sorry." We are actually about to close for a private delivery. Can I help you with something to go? The man smiled. Actually, yes. We are here for her. Every muscle in my body tightened. Emily blinked. I think you have the wrong bakery. No, he answered calmly. We have the right one. I stepped forward before she could say another word. If you have business, you can discuss it with me. His eyes shifted toward mine for the first time. Recognition flashed across his face for less than a second before disappearing behind another polite smile. Mr. Moretti, you are exactly where we hoped you would be. Emily looked between us, completely confused. Do you all know each other? I wish the answer had been yes. Familiar enemies were predictable. These men were something else. The leader ignored her question and kept speaking to me. We do not need you today. That sentence unsettled me more than any threat could have. Nobody in my world ignored the man they came to find. Unless I was never the real objective. Anthony burst through the front door with 2 members of my security detail close behind. They scanned the room, their expressions hard but controlled. The 3 strangers never appeared alarmed. In fact, they almost seemed satisfied. One of them glanced toward Emily again. Thank you for your cooperation, he said pleasantly. We will see you very soon. Then, just as quickly as they had entered, they walked back into the rain. Anthony reached me within seconds. Boss, we traced unfamiliar vehicles circling the block for the last 20 minutes. We should leave immediately. I nodded, but my attention stayed on Emily. She looked at the closed door as though trying to convince herself the conversation had never happened. Did I do something wrong? She asked quietly. I shook my head. No, you did everything right. She folded her arms, not from fear, but from uncertainty. Who were they? I searched for an answer that would not pull her into my world. People who made a mistake. She gave a small, nervous laugh. That did not sound like a mistake. Neither did the feeling growing in my chest. Anthony lowered his voice. Boss, we intercepted a message 5 minutes ago. They have been watching this place for almost 2 weeks. 2 weeks. I had only been coming here for 3 months. The timing was too precise to ignore. Emily handed me the paper bag I had forgotten on the counter. Your bread, she said softly. You almost left without it. I accepted the warm bag, noticing her hands tremble for the first time since I had met her. She was trying very hard not to let it show. Thank you, I replied. She forced a smile that did not quite reach her eyes. Hopefully next Tuesday will be less exciting. I wanted to promise her it would. Instead, I looked through the rain streaking across the bakery window and saw a black sedan parked half a block away. It pulled into traffic the moment I noticed it. They had never come for me. They had come to learn one thing: whether I would protect the woman behind that counter. And by simply walking into her bakery every Tuesday, I had already answered their question. I did not go back to my penthouse that morning. Instead, I sat inside the back seat of my SUV 3 blocks away, watching Carter's bakery through rain-speckled glass, while the paper bag Emily had handed me rested untouched beside me. The smell of warm honey oat bread filled the cabin, completely out of place among leather seats, encrypted phones, and security reports. Anthony stood outside speaking quietly into an earpiece while the rest of my team rotated positions along the street without drawing attention. They had protected me through corporate wars, political scandals, and countless threats. Yet none of us knew who the 3 strangers truly were. That bothered me more than I cared to admit. Anthony finally climbed into the passenger seat. We reviewed every traffic camera within 6 blocks, he said. The sedan disappeared before reaching the tunnel. Professional drivers. No plates. No faces. I looked back toward the bakery window. Emily was sweeping flour from the floor as though she were determined to rescue the last piece of an ordinary morning. Customers came and went. Children pointed excitedly at cupcakes. An elderly couple shared coffee by the front window. Life continued exactly as it should. That was the problem. My world had already brushed against hers. Ordinary days rarely survived that collision. Increase surveillance, I said. Quietly. Anthony turned halfway in his seat. For you? For the bakery. He hesitated. Boss, with respect, protecting that place makes our priorities obvious. They are already obvious. Silence settled between us. He knew I was right. Whoever had been watching understood that Emily mattered before I understood it myself. The drive back to headquarters usually took 20 minutes. That morning it felt twice as long. Every traffic light reminded me of the look on Emily's face when she asked if she had done something wrong. She believed kindness had somehow invited trouble into her life. She could not have been more mistaken. Trouble had followed me through her front door. The conference room was already full when I arrived. Maps covered one wall. Digital screens displayed financial records, shipping routes, and security feeds from across the city. My advisors expected another strategy meeting. Instead, I placed the loaf of bread in the center of the polished table. Every conversation stopped. "Find out who has been watching Carter's Bakery," I said. "I do not care how small the connection seems. I want names, businesses, phone records, rental agreements, everything." One of my analysts frowned. "Is the bakery connected to our competitors?" "Not yet." Another looked up from his laptop. "Then why would anyone spend weeks observing it?" "Because I made one mistake," I thought. I allowed myself one peaceful habit. I never answered aloud. Hours passed. Reports arrived faster than coffee. Nothing connected. Emily Carter had lived in the same apartment for 5 years. She paid her taxes on time. She volunteered twice a month at a neighborhood food pantry. She inherited the bakery from her grandparents after culinary school. No criminal history. No suspicious accounts. No hidden identity. She was exactly who she appeared to be. Anthony entered just before sunset carrying a small envelope. "This was delivered by courier 30 minutes ago." There was no return address. Only my name written across the front. Inside rested a single bakery receipt. The total matched the loaf Emily had sold me that morning. On the back, someone had written one sentence in neat black ink. "We know exactly where you find peace." I read the message twice before folding it carefully. Whoever sent it understood something I had refused to admit, even to myself. They did not need to destroy my empire. They only needed to reach the one place where Vincent Moretti stopped acting like a king and started feeling like an ordinary man. The next morning, I broke my own rule. Instead of sending someone else, I returned to Carter's Bakery myself. Anthony argued with me for nearly 10 minutes before finally giving up. "If they are watching," he said as we stopped across the street, "this is exactly what they want." I looked through the windshield at the familiar storefront. Fresh flowers sat beneath the windows. The chalkboard outside advertised apple cinnamon muffins and fresh blueberry scones. Everything looked exactly the way it had every Tuesday before my life crossed Emily Carter's. "Maybe," I answered quietly, "but I need to know whether she is all right." The bell chimed as I stepped inside. The smell of butter and vanilla greeted me before anyone did. Emily stood behind the counter arranging pastries with careful hands. When she noticed me, genuine relief softened her face before she quickly tried to hide it behind a professional smile. "You came back," she said. "I was beginning to think yesterday scared you away." I smiled faintly. "I have dealt with worse than rainy mornings." She laughed, but it faded almost immediately. "I barely slept." She lowered her voice. I kept replaying everything that happened. Those men, they were not joking, were they? I chose my words carefully. "No." She looked down at the tray she was holding. I kept asking myself if I had seen one of them before, but I cannot remember where. That caught my attention. "You think you recognize them?" "Not exactly." She shook her head. "More like, one of their voices felt familiar." Before I could ask another question, an elderly customer walked in, greeting Emily by name. She welcomed him with the same warm smile she had given me the day before, recommending a fresh loaf she knew his wife liked. She remembered his usual order without looking at the register. She asked about his granddaughter's college applications. She listened more than she spoke. Watching her, I realized something unusual. Emily noticed details most people ignored. Faces, habits, small changes. The customer left carrying 2 paper bags. Emily turned back toward me and sighed. "Sorry. Small businesses do not stop because life gets strange." "Maybe that is why they survive," I replied. She reached beneath the counter and handed me a warm cinnamon roll wrapped in wax paper. "This one is on the house." I frowned. "You are running a business. And you already paid for enough bread yesterday." Her smile returned, but only for a moment. Then her eyes drifted toward the front window. Across the street, a delivery van sat parked beside the curb. It had no company logo. Nothing unusual about that by itself. Yet Emily stared at it a second longer than necessary. "Is something wrong?" I asked. She hesitated. "Maybe I am imagining things." "Tell me anyway." She folded her arms. "That van was parked there yesterday morning before everything happened." I looked outside. The driver remained inside with a newspaper lifted high enough to hide most of his face. Anthony had already noticed it. I saw him speaking quietly into his sleeve. Emily leaned closer and whispered, "I know this sounds silly, but every time I look outside, I feel like someone is waiting for something." I followed her gaze without moving my head. The driver lowered the newspaper for just a heartbeat before starting the engine. The van pulled away slowly, disappearing around the corner. Emily released a breath she had apparently been holding. "See," she said softly. "Maybe I really am overthinking." I looked at the empty street where the van had been only seconds earlier. "No," I answered. "I think you are finally noticing the same thing I have been seeing." And in that quiet moment, I understood something that none of my intelligence reports had revealed. Emily was not simply frightened. She was paying attention. She had been quietly collecting small pieces of a puzzle long before I realized there was one. That afternoon, I told Anthony to reduce the visible security around the bakery. He stared at me as though I had forgotten everything that had kept me alive for the past 15 years. "You want fewer people watching her?" he asked. "No," I answered. "I want fewer people she can see." Emily deserved at least the illusion of a normal day. If she looked outside and found my security team on every corner, her bakery would stop feeling like home. We shifted our people farther back, blending into delivery routes, coffee shops, and parked vehicles. I watched from a bookstore across the street where the second floor overlooked the entire block. Every customer who entered the bakery was photographed. Every unfamiliar face was quietly logged. Hours passed with nothing unusual. By early evening, I almost convinced myself the tension was beginning to fade. Then Emily surprised me. She locked the front door 15 minutes earlier than usual, switched off the display lights, and carried a small paper bag out the back entrance instead of leaving through the front. Anthony immediately looked toward me. She changed her routine. "Follow her," I said, "but stay out of sight." Emily walked 3 blocks through the neighborhood, greeting people along the way. A florist waved from across the street. 2 children ran over to hug her before racing back toward a nearby playground. She stopped outside a modest brick church where volunteers were arranging folding tables for the evening meal they served every Wednesday. Without hesitation, she tied another apron around her waist and began placing fresh bread into baskets. I watched from inside my vehicle, strangely speechless. She had worked since before sunrise, yet here she was giving away what she had spent all day making. There were no cameras, no reporters, nobody applauding her generosity. She simply believed hungry people deserved fresh bread. Anthony quietly read from a tablet. Every Wednesday for almost 4 years. She donates whatever is left at closing. For years, long before she ever met me, an elderly woman struggled to carry 2 heavy boxes toward the church entrance. Before any volunteer noticed, Emily hurried over, lifted one of the boxes herself, and walked beside her, smiling the entire time. She moved through life the way sunlight moved through windows. Naturally, without asking permission, I suddenly understood why my enemies had chosen her instead of someone else. They believed kindness created weakness. They assumed compassion could always be manipulated. They had spent years studying men like me. They had never studied someone like Emily Carter. My phone vibrated. A secure message from one of my analysts appeared on the screen. "Surveillance review complete. Unknown male entered bakery yesterday morning before you arrived. Purchased nothing. Left envelope beneath chair near window." I looked up immediately toward the bakery several blocks away, then back at Emily. She was laughing with a little girl who proudly handed her a drawing made with bright crayons. Emily accepted it as though someone had given her priceless artwork. I opened the attached security image. The man wore an ordinary baseball cap and plain jacket. Nothing memorable except for one detail. A silver ring shaped like an anchor. My heartbeat slowed. Not because I was calm, because every instinct I possessed had locked into place. The same symbol was carefully sketched in the corner of the little girl's drawing that Emily now held in her hands. She noticed it too. Her smile disappeared for only a second before she folded the drawing and quietly slipped it into her apron pocket without letting anyone else see. She had recognized the symbol, but instead of telling anyone, she chose to keep that discovery to herself. In that single quiet moment, I realized Emily was carrying a secret she had not shared with me, and somehow I knew that secret was about to change everything. I did not confront Emily the next morning. 15 years of building an empire had taught me one lesson that never failed. People revealed far more when they believed they still had a choice. So I walked into the bakery as though nothing had changed. The familiar bell welcomed me. Fresh coffee steamed behind the counter. Cinnamon and butter filled the air. Emily looked up from shaping dough and smiled, but this time I noticed something different. Her eyes drifted toward the front window before they settled on me. She was checking the street. She had started looking for danger before she looked for customers. That realization sat heavier on my shoulders than any threat ever had. "You are earlier than usual," she said, brushing flour from her hands. I could not sleep, I admitted. It was true, although not for the reason she probably imagined. She poured a cup of coffee without asking how I took it. She already remembered. "On the house again?" I asked. She shook her head. "Not today. Today you are paying like everyone else." I smiled as I handed her a $20 bill. "That sounds fair." She placed the change beside my cup, but instead of letting go, her fingers rested on the counter for a second longer than necessary. "Can I ask you something?" she said quietly. "Of course. Those men, if they ever came back, would they come because of me or because of you?" The question deserved honesty. "Because of me." She lowered her eyes. "That is what I thought." Neither of us spoke for several seconds. The espresso machine hissed softly behind her while rain tapped against the front windows. Outside, people hurried to work carrying umbrellas, unaware that the quiet bakery had become the center of a game neither of us wanted to play. Emily finally reached into the pocket of her apron and placed a folded piece of paper beside my coffee cup. It was the drawing the little girl had given her at the church. She carefully unfolded it until the crayon picture of bread, smiling faces, and bright blue skies covered the counter. Then she pointed toward the tiny silver anchor sketched in the lower right corner. "This was not there when she first handed it to me," she whispered. I looked up. "You are certain?" She nodded immediately. She drew the sun while I watched. Then someone called me to help carry more bread inside. The picture stayed on the table for maybe 2 minutes. When I came back, the anchor had appeared. I studied the drawing more closely. The lines looked cleaner than the rest of the child's artwork, as though they had been added by an adult using a different crayon. Emily reached into another pocket and quietly placed something else beside the drawing. It was a neatly folded receipt. I found this under one of the church tables after everyone left. I unfolded it carefully. There was no store name, no purchase listed, only 6 words printed across the back. "Tell no one. Protect the baker." Anthony entered through the front door at that exact moment, his expression unusually tense. He walked directly toward me, but stopped when he noticed the receipt in my hand. "Boss," he said carefully, "we have a problem." I slipped the paper into my jacket before anyone else could see it. "What happened?" He lowered his voice. "Every camera covering the church parking lot went offline for exactly 4 minutes last night." Emily looked from Anthony to me, then back to the folded receipt now hidden inside my pocket. She did not ask another question. She already knew the answer. Someone had been close enough to leave us a warning without ever being seen. And for reasons I still could not understand, that unseen stranger wanted Emily alive just as much as I did. For the first time in years, I canceled every meeting on my calendar. Investors could wait. Attorneys could wait. Even rival negotiations could wait. Nothing mattered more than answering one question. Who wanted Emily Carter alive, and why were they speaking to us through hidden messages instead of showing themselves? Anthony spread photographs across the conference table. Images from traffic cameras, delivery routes, security reports. Every sheet carried the same symbol somewhere in the background. A tiny silver anchor. Sometimes it appeared on a keychain. Sometimes on a coffee mug. Once, stitched onto the corner of a messenger bag. "It cannot be a coincidence anymore," Anthony said. "Someone wants us to notice it." I studied every picture without speaking. None of the people wearing or carrying the symbol ever looked toward the cameras. They blended into crowds with practiced ease, appearing ordinary enough to disappear the moment you looked away. Whoever organized this knew exactly how surveillance worked. My phone vibrated. Emily. It was the first time she had ever called me. I answered immediately. "Are you all right?" There was a brief silence before she spoke. "I think somebody left something for me again." 20 minutes later, I was standing inside the bakery. Customers filled the front room, laughing over coffee and fresh pastries. Everything looked peaceful, yet Emily's expression told a different story. She quietly led me into the kitchen, where trays of cooling bread covered stainless steel racks. She reached beneath one of the trays and handed me a plain white envelope. "I found it under the flour delivery this morning." There was no address, no stamp, only one folded piece of paper inside. I opened it carefully. 6 more words. Trust the baker. Watch the lighthouse tonight. Anthony frowned. There is no lighthouse in Manhattan. Emily looked thoughtful instead of confused. Actually, she walked toward a shelf and picked up an old cookie tin. From inside, she removed a faded postcard showing a small lighthouse beside the Hudson River. This is not in the city, she explained. It is almost an hour north. My grandparents used to take me there every summer. I turned the postcard over. In faded blue ink, someone had written a date nearly 20 years earlier. Beneath it were 3 words. Never forget kindness. Emily smiled sadly. My grandfather wrote that. I looked back at the lighthouse photograph. Suddenly the message made sense. Whoever had contacted us knew details from Emily's childhood that almost nobody else should have known. Anthony immediately ordered a background review of everyone connected to the bakery's history. Employees, suppliers, family friends, former neighbors. We found nothing unusual. The deeper we searched, the more ordinary Emily's life appeared. That should have comforted me. Instead, it made everything more unsettling. Late that evening, I stood outside the bakery while rain drifted through the glow of the streetlights. Emily locked the front door and joined me beneath the awning. Do you think we should go? She asked softly. I looked toward the dark street where my security vehicles waited at a distance. Every instinct I possessed warned me that the lighthouse was exactly the kind of place someone would choose to pull me away from the city. It could be another trap, another carefully planned distraction. Emily wrapped her arms against the cool evening air and quietly said something I did not expect. If somebody has gone through this much trouble to warn us instead of hurting us, maybe they are hoping we arrive before someone else does. I looked at her for a long moment. She was afraid. I could hear it in her breathing. I could see it in the way her hands trembled. Yet fear had not made her stop thinking. It had made her pay closer attention. At that moment, I realized the strongest person beside me was not the man surrounded by security. It was the baker who still believed every warning deserved to be heard, even when nobody knew who had whispered it. We left the city just before sunset. Anthony insisted on bringing 2 vehicles and enough security to surround an entire block, but I ordered everyone to stay far enough away that the old lighthouse would appear abandoned. If someone truly wanted to speak to us, I was not going to frighten them into disappearing. The drive north took a little over an hour. Rain faded into a light mist, and the Hudson River reflected the last traces of orange sunlight beneath heavy clouds. Emily sat beside me in complete silence, holding the faded postcard from her grandfather with both hands. She looked out the window almost the entire trip, as though she were trying to remember pieces of a childhood that had slowly slipped away. When we finally reached the narrow gravel road leading toward the lighthouse, she spoke for the first time in nearly 30 minutes. It feels smaller than I remember. I smiled. Most places do when we grow up. She nodded thoughtfully. My grandfather always told me that people return here only when they need answers they cannot find anywhere else. The lighthouse stood quietly above the river, its white paint weathered by decades of wind and winter storms. No tourists, no parked cars, only the sound of waves touching the rocks below and seabirds circling overhead. Anthony completed one final security sweep before quietly signaling that the area appeared empty. 5 minutes, he said. Then we leave. Emily walked ahead of me toward the wooden entrance, running her fingers across the old railing as though greeting an old friend. Inside, the circular room smelled of salt, aged wood, and old books. Dust floated through narrow beams of fading light. Everything looked untouched for years. Almost. Emily suddenly stopped beside a small wooden bench beneath the staircase. This was not here before, she whispered. Resting on the bench sat a freshly baked loaf of honey oat bread wrapped in brown paper. My breath caught. It looked almost identical to the one she had handed me the morning we first met. Carefully folded beneath the ribbon was another handwritten note. Emily reached for it, but before she could unfold the paper, she froze. Vincent, she whispered. Look. On the ribbon tying the bread closed hung a tiny silver anchor charm, the same symbol that had followed us for days. I took the note and slowly opened it. The handwriting matched every message we had received before. Tonight they come for the king. Save the man instead. Anthony stepped forward immediately. Boss, we need to move. Right now. Before I could answer, Emily gently touched my arm. Her eyes were fixed not on the note, but on the loaf of bread. "This is not from them," she said quietly. "How do you know?" She pointed toward the braid of dough running across the top crust. "That pattern. I invented it last year after my grandmother passed away. I never taught anyone outside the bakery." I looked at the loaf again, seeing details I would never have noticed myself. She was right. Whoever had baked this knew Emily personally. Not from surveillance. Not from photographs. From real life. Anthony's radio suddenly crackled with urgent voices reporting unexpected vehicle movement several miles away. He immediately turned toward the doorway. "Boss, we have to leave." Emily did not move. Instead, she slowly unfolded the paper one more time and stared at the back. Hidden beneath the first message, barely visible beneath the fading light, another sentence had been written in smaller letters. She looked up at me, her face suddenly drained of color. "Vincent," she whispered, "I know who left this, and if I am right, they have been trying to protect you from the very beginning." Emily held the note with steady hands, but I could see the emotion gathering behind her eyes. "My grandfather used to volunteer here every Saturday," she said softly. "There was another baker who worked beside him for years. His name was Samuel. They were best friends. When my grandfather became too sick to continue, Samuel promised he would always watch over this place if our family ever needed help." She turned the note over once more and pointed toward the bottom corner where a tiny hand-drawn loaf of bread had been sketched beside the silver anchor. That was Samuel's signature. He used to draw it on every birthday card he gave me. Anthony carefully searched the empty lighthouse while I looked through the old windows toward the quiet river. Whoever Samuel had become, he had spent days warning us instead of asking for anything in return. My phone vibrated. One of my analysts had finally identified the silver anchor. It was never the symbol of a criminal organization. It belonged to a volunteer maritime rescue foundation that had quietly operated along the Hudson River for decades. Samuel had worked there after retiring from the bakery. Everything suddenly fit together. The messages, the anonymous warnings, the careful distance. He had recognized danger before we had, and he had chosen to protect Emily the only way he knew how. We returned to Manhattan before midnight. The following morning, Anthony's team confirmed that the unfamiliar vehicles had disappeared from every surveillance camera around the neighborhood. The strange deliveries stopped. The envelopes never returned. Whatever plan had been forming around us had quietly fallen apart before it could become something worse. Weeks passed. Life slowly found its ordinary rhythm again. Every Tuesday morning, I walked through the same bakery door. The little brass bell welcomed me exactly the way it always had. Emily still wore flour on her sleeves by lunchtime. She still remembered every customer's favorite order. She still donated fresh bread every Wednesday evening without telling anyone about it. Some habits deserved to survive untouched. One rainy morning, she placed a warm honey oat loaf into a paper bag and slid it across the counter with the familiar smile that had somehow become the safest place in my week. "You know," she said, "you could probably bake this yourself by now." I laughed. That would require patience. It would also require listening. "I am learning." She nodded as though that answer satisfied her. Before I left, she reached beneath the counter and handed me a small wooden keychain shaped like an anchor. "Samuel wanted me to have this years ago," she explained. "I think he would rather you carry it now." I closed my hand around the smooth piece of carved wood, feeling its worn edges from decades of use. For a man who had spent his entire life believing survival depended on power, wealth, and careful planning, it felt strangely fitting that my greatest reminder came from a retired baker I had never even met. As I stepped back into the morning rain, I looked through the bakery window one last time. Emily was laughing with a little boy who could barely see over the display case as she patiently helped him choose between two cookies. She had no idea that, without ever raising her voice or asking for anything in return, she had changed the way I measured strength forever. People still believed Vincent Moretti ruled his city because he inspired fear. They were wrong. Fear built walls. Kindness built people. And in the end, it was never my empire that kept me standing. It was one ordinary baker who reminded me that the strongest choice a person can make is to protect someone else without expecting to be remembered.